Welcome to Data Meets Design, where we use the tools of graphic design to improve our presentation of data. Today, we're going to be having a look at how to improve our representations of parts to whole, in particular focusing on two of the standard plots, pie charts and stacked bar charts, or divided bar charts. So let's begin. We started this class with a poll in which I asked you why you were taking SC 103N. And the options were that you needed a general arts credit, a general science credit, or GN, you needed both, or you needed neither. In total, we had 40 respondents. And so a natural question would be to ask, how does a class break down in terms of why they're taking this? Of course, the table works and we can see the results, but one of the reasons that we like to make data visualizations is that it can be easier to process the entirety of the results at once with a figure. And so the two ways to represent this might be a pie chart, which might look something like this if you use default settings in Excel but just improve the colors slightly. Or a divided or stacked bar chart, which might look like this if you use the defaults in Excel. These plots aren't terrible, but they could be vastly improved by using some of the ideas of graphic design and some of the principles that we've learned so far. In particular, we can ask ourselves, how do we accomplish the primary purpose of showing composition in a way that's easy for our reader to look at and understand? And so let's think about how to improve what we have already created, representing the reasons why people take this course. And so both of these charts try to compare things by relative area. And so that means that we're comparing, let's say, slices on the pie chart or different bar sizes for the divided bar chart. We have already a legend, but that forces us to look back and forth between the legend and the slices or the bars. And so our principle of proximity tells us it would almost always be better to just go ahead and directly label each of these slices or bars, like this. It's now so much easier to just process what belongs to what, instead of needing to look back and forth between the chart itself where the data resides and looking at the legend. So let's go with directly labeling. Now let's also think about, because we're comparing relative area, which of these is more effective? Even though we're thinking about area, what's changing is on the left, the angle, or on the right, the length. It turns out that the human brain is much better at estimating differences in length than differences in area. So if we look at the pie chart and I ask you which pie slice is larger, you can ultimately decide, but it's a little difficult and you have to think about it. Whereas when we turn to the stacked bar chart and look at the two exact same data points, it now is exceedingly obvious which one is larger. We don't have to think about it quite as much. There are times where pie charts are better than divided bar charts and vice versa, but if you have two data points that are of similar size and you want your audience to be able to tell them apart quickly, your divided bar chart is probably going to be a better choice. Another thing that people sometimes do in order to make it clear what's larger than something else is to just directly label the data with the size, like this. And this does work, but it can also lead to a feeling of cluttering. And so again, I think it's better to think about how we might graphically make it easier for people to tell which bar or which slice is bigger and leave out the percentages unless it's something that is absolutely needed. Something else that can help though, if we have slices or bars that are close together in size, is to just order them by that size. If we place them in order from largest to smallest, then somebody looking at our plots can immediately tell the order in which they should be coming. And so here I now know that the need general arts is larger than the need general science, or GN, just by looking at the order in which this plot is arranged. Another thing that we should get in the habit of doing with our plots is giving a short title to orient people to the point. And I would say that a natural thing that people sometimes do is just state something, give us a declaration like reasons students enrolled in SC 103N. And this is fine, it does tell us what's going on. However, it's not the most effective way to label things. Instead, I think it's better to make the title an assertion. And that assertion should be what you want people to conclude from looking at your data visualization. So in this case, we might say that most students enroll in SC103N to satisfy a particular requirement. Now we've made that assertion, and what happens is that the data that we're presenting is the evidence for that assertion. Something else that's critical for both pie charts and bar charts, and we've already seen once, is that trying to show too much data is a major problem. So try to simplify this. For instance, if instead of showing the reasons why people are taking this course, I instead showed the majors of the people that are taking this course. Now there's just too many different majors. It's hard to come up with colors for them. Even if I do come up with colors for them and plot it, it's basically impossible to assign them either as a pie chart, as on the left, or as a divided by chart on the right. And so again, think about simplifying the data you're showing, especially when you're doing part to whole with a bar chart or a pie chart, because you're only going to be able to show perhaps 4 to 5 slices in each case and have your reader still be able to understand what they're looking at. So let's now go away from looking at design rules for both pie charts and divided bar charts and think about just pie charts. When I think about a pie chart, what could we do to refine this already reasonable pie chart? Well, something that we might do is think about the way in which people are used to processing information. If we think about going from largest to smallest, most people who are used to looking at things like analog clocks will actually feel more comfortable looking clockwise rather than counterclockwise. So an easy fix is just to reorder this so that I go large to small in a clockwise direction. That will feel more natural to our reader. Something else that we might do is that people oftentimes can immediately identify what the largest chunk is. And if we think about a clock where 12 noon or up and down at the top occupies a special place, then we can use that large chunk in order to define that special place for our reading. For instance, placing the dividing line between the largest and second largest on that vertical line. Now it becomes even easier to process what's happening. I start with this large chunk that largely I can ignore because it's immediately obvious to me that it's huge. And then I can move around this circle in a clockwise direction from second largest down to the smallest slice. And again, we're just increasing the ease with which a human being can process the data we're showing them. Something else that we might think about is, instead of having 4 different colors, using colors that are somewhat similar to each other in order to indicate grouping by type. So in this case, we have essentially 2 types: people that don't need any general education and requirement, and people that are trying to meet a general education requirement. And so let's give the people that need to meet a particular general education requirement a similar set of colors, perhaps blues. And now what we have is something where I can see that primarily it is the people who need to satisfy a requirement that are taking this course. I could also ask, do I really need these black dividing lines? If I choose my colors appropriately, I may not. And so by removing them, I might also have a cleaner looking graphic. Now you can decide, some people might like the one on the left with the higher contrast dividers to the one on the right. And I think a case could be made either way. But this is something to always ask yourself. If I have an element, is it really required in order to show the data, or by removing it, can I simplify the presentation and make it look better? And so the last thing I might think about is, what's something that people really want to know? In this case, the title tells me what I think people want to know, which is primarily who's enrolling in this course. And so I could add back in elements that help make that case. For instance, now I've put a bar on the outside that says that 60% of people are the people that are taking this because they need to satisfy a requirement. And so again, do you really need this? Probably not. Does it help with the story you're trying to tell? Perhaps. Think about it. In this case, I've actually decided that the one on the left ends up being the most clean, and so that's what I would choose to show if I were presenting this to someone else. Now we can move on to stacked bar charts, and we'll see that there's several similar considerations. The first, though, that's different is thinking about whether we want horizontal or vertical stacked bars. And in general, the vertical ones will look more clean. They will be easier to directly label. And so by and large, I think that I would start with considering vertical stacked bars and then only move to horizontal bars if it's something that is required for the design that I'm making. Something else to think about, especially because we're ordering things now vertically, is that people will feel more comfortable if we put the larger bar on the bottom, like this. And the reason is quite simple. When we see things stacked vertically like buildings, we're used to seeing them larger at the base and smaller at the top. And so something like what's shown on the right will feel more natural to your reader simply because it feels more stable. And here again, we're just hacking into people's assumptions about the way the world works in order to make them feel more comfortable with our data. Again, we can group our categories together by type and color them similarly as we did with the pie chart, and this might provide us a better way to show that the majority of people really are those that are taking this course because they need to satisfy a requirement. As before, we could ask, do we really need these dividing lines, or can we have a simpler looking graphic as a result? And again, you may reach a different conclusion than me, but I like the one on the right a little bit better than the one on the left. It seems a little less cluttered, a little bit more simple, and I think that fits with the modern design aesthetic that people typically have anymore. And so this is the final one that I would arrive at, and you can see that it looks somewhat similar to what we had for the pie chart. And in fact, between these two, I would say in this particular case, actually the pie chart might be more effective than the stacked bar chart. However, remember that the stacked bar chart will become a better choice when you have slices or bars that are even closer in size than this, or perhaps if you wanted to show a little bit more data like 5 or 6 categories. By the time you get to 6 categories, pie charts become almost unusable, whereas the divided bar chart has some utility. And so then the last thing I want to mention is that we spent a lot of time talking about pie charts and divided bar charts, but they're not the only way to represent parts to whole. And there's other charts in this, but one set of categorization that I really like has been done by the folks at Visual Vocabulary. And you'll see here that we have this stacked column or bar chart that we've talked about in the top left. We have a pie chart down below that, and a donut chart which is related to the pie chart. But there's many others like arc and grid plot, Marimekko, and the Venn and waterfall. And these are ones that we'll look at further in this course. But for now, we're starting with the basics, the ones that we're very used to seeing, like the pie chart and the stacked or divided bar chart. So with that, hopefully you've enjoyed taking a closer look at how we can represent parts to whole, specifically using pie charts and bar charts. And you've seen that some simple design rules can help us produce plots that are more attractive, easier to engage with, and easier for our reader to interpret. And after all, isn't that the point of good design in data visualizations? Is that we can bring in a reader and we can give them our message as easily and simply as we possibly can. Okay, so that's it for today, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.